Hello, and welcome to Season 1, Episode 6 of the Virtual Coffee Podcast. I'm Becca, and this is a podcast that features members of the Virtual Coffee community. Virtual Coffee is an intimate group of developers at all stages of their coding journey, and they're here on this podcast sharing their stories and what they've learned. And we're here to share it with you. Here with me today is my co-host, Dan.
Thanks, Becca. In this episode, you'll hear from Drew Clements. Drew is a career transitioner, a father of two, and full-time developer. And he spends his spare time building Protege.dev and hopes to become a strong advocate for junior developers everywhere. In this episode, we talk about building a career and also Drew's experience building Protege.dev, the platform curated with remote jobs for junior developers. Drew talks about the struggles of junior level job searching, the importance of supportive company culture, and learning in public while building Protege.
We start every episode of the podcast like we start every virtual coffee. We introduce ourselves with our name, where we're from, what we do, and a random check-in question. Today's question is, what is the most beautiful place near where you live? We hope you enjoyed this episode. Hey, I'm Becca. I'm a front-end developer from a small town in Ohio, and the most beautiful place near me, I don't really know, but it snowed a lot last night, and so all of the pine trees look really, really beautiful, so I'm just going to go with pine trees covered with snow.
That's awesome. I love how everything looks with snow on it. Hi, I'm Dan. I am a front-end developer from Cleveland, Ohio. I say Cleveland every time. I'm actually from Lakewood, which is the first city west of Cleveland. And so there is a park called Lakewood Park that's on the lake here. And it's very beautiful. There's lots of, it's big and there's lots of cool little spots to hang out. So that's that.
I'm Drew. I'm a front-end developer with Foster Commerce. The most beautiful place near where I live in the South, so my options are limited here. So I'm like 5 minutes from St. Simon's Island, but the beaches aren't necessarily pretty. They just have expensive resorts. And I'm just south of Savannah, so they have a pretty rad downtown. But, okay, I got one. On the other side of the state from me, which is still relatively close compared to you guys, we have, they call it the Little Grand Canyon. It's a little hiking trail. It really does just look like a miniature version of the Grand Canyon.
Nice.
That's cool.
That sounds cool.
Yeah, it's pretty
Vacation 2021. Well, welcome, Drew. We are very happy to have you. And fun fact about Drew, he designed the Virtual Coffee logo, so thanks for that.
I do what I can.
We always like to start off with the origin story of how you got into tech. So can you give us the background?
Yeah, I feel like my story into tech is like a story linked to a story linked to a story. So growing up, I played in a bunch of punk rock bands. One of the last bands I played in, I met a guy from the local music scene named Sean. Sean moved away to California and became a developer. Right before he did that, I tattooed him. Me tattooing landed me an apprenticeship as a designer a few years later, which then that's where I was kind of introduced to like HTML and CSS. So I was like, hey, I'm learning this stuff. I remember Sean was doing something like this. So then I reached back out to him. Me and him started kind of talking again. So from there, I was able to kind of work into a developer role with that same company, and left tattooing. So it's kind of a guy I met through the local music scene in 2010 ended up getting me into developing a decade later. But yeah, so I spent 7 years as a tattoo artist, transitioned to graphic design. From graphic design, I used that Sean, the old connection, to get my way here. And I don't think I could have made that happen if I had all the money in the world and 10 years to plan it, but here I am.
That's awesome. So if we ever have a virtual coffee on-site conference, are you going to offer tattoos? All virtual coffee logos?
Yes, I will do that.
All right, we have it recorded, so now you can't back out. Okay, so also I want to know about how you found virtual coffee. I feel like I've known you a lot longer than virtual coffee has been going on. So, but how did you end up at virtual coffee?
How did I end up at virtual coffee? It's funny enough that we're recording this on a podcast because I met you through reaching out to find people to interview for a podcast I was going to start. So I still have the recording. Actually,
Nope.
I don't know if it ever got editing.
Nope.
I don't. Yeah, I just had it right here on the desk. No, so I guess in 2019 I was going to start a podcast. So I reached out to you. We connected over Twitter. That never ended up happening, but when I saw you posting, so at the beginning of 2020, I was working two jobs. I was working full time as a designer, part time as a developer, and I lost both of those jobs within like 24 hours of each other. And with a wife that was 5 months pregnant, that was kind of like a gut check. But around that same time was when you had posted about virtual coffee. So it's like, I have a lot of spare time on my hands. Becca posted a lot of awesome stuff. We had a great conversation when we recorded our podcast episode together. So I was like, yeah, let me check this out and see what happens. And now you can't get rid of me.
I think that podcast episode that I recorded with you, I had just been working with Dan for a couple of months, and I was still trying to wrap my head around things. And I remember you asking me questions, and I'm like, I don't even know the words that I should use to answer those questions. So
if it's any consolation, there's still a lot of times I don't know the words I should use to answer questions.
Yeah, that's for sure. Same.
Yeah.
Same.
But it was really great podcast interview because you're just fun to be around, I guess. So I'm happy that you are here with us today and at Virtual Coffee.
Happy to be here. Like I said, you can't get rid of me.
Okay, so fast forward a little bit. You've got another job. You're a career changer. And you're like, oh, hey, I bought this domain called Protege.dev. So on top of all of the other things that I'm doing, I'm going to start this community building project. So why and how?
Why and how? Well, so I originally bought the Protege domain. So we back up just a little bit. I had an old side project called Cult.xp. It was a really bad name. Never named anything that ever. But that's what the original podcast that I interviewed you for was going to kind of be in parallel with that. And so I knew that it was a bad name. So I was trying to think of something else I could call it. The idea of that project was that it was going to be pretty much a place where people could connect to work on open source issues together, kind of like a junior finding a senior willing to, give them some time. So I was just trying to think the name Cult.xp. I think I just used like a thesaurus or something, like what's another word for someone that's learning something or something like that. And cult was somehow on that list. It was like an inexperienced person or something like that. Again, horrible name. Don't ever call anything that. So I came across the word protege. It's pretty obvious. I don't know why I didn't think of it in the first place. So I was looking around on different domains. Actually, no. I went to Netlify and I was like, let me see if protege.com is available. Obviously, it wasn't. So I was like, let me see if protege.dev is available. It was for $15. I was like, that's not bad at all. So I hit the next button expecting there to be like an insert payment information. And then it said, congratulations. I was like, okay, I guess this is a thing now. So I kind of went back and forth on, do I want to make something new with that name? Do I want to rebrand the old project under Protege, which was the original idea? But then COVID happened, and I lost both of those jobs. So I think I accidentally bought the domain in February, and then in March was when I lost work. So I lost work, so I was looking at all the job boards all the time, and it was, you see senior lead, tech lead, blah 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 blah, and I was like, there's nothing. It's so hard to find anything for someone of my skill level. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to build the job board that I wish I had.
That's awesome.
And that's kind of how it ended up getting started. I lost I lost my job and gave myself a new one, a new one that doesn't pay anything.
I love
I know
that. I
that
love the
feeling.
idea of like you have a problem, and so you just decide to fix it or try to
Yeah,
fix it yourself, right?
that's, that's
Plus,
that's pretty much what happened.
yeah, it's amazing. And then on top of that, you're going to gain experience for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
in building it, right? We were just talking to Vic, and he was talking about a lot of this sort of the same thing, right? Like he frames it a little differently, but the indie hacking mentality, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of you have a problem, and so instead of, I don't know, wandering around or just being sad, right? Like you just kind of go and dive into it, right? And hopefully it becomes a successful product, and also you're giving yourself like experience and scratching your own itch and all that stuff. So it's very cool.
Yeah, the when I first started out on Protege, my mindset was, I'm going to build this thing in React. I needed a React project on my portfolio, so I told myself, like, I'm gonna build this out, and if it works, awesome. If not, then I have something on the resume that will maybe at least help get me hired, which it
Yeah.
actually did fairly early on. So I think I started building it in March, and either at the end of March or early April, um, I was connected with a company called Layerframe out of Florida. Super awesome team. Um, and the work I'd done on Protege, even at that point, before it was even done, just the fact that I was doing that, building that product, but also the work I'd put into it myself, pretty much jumping in blind, was one of the reasons that they can even consider to bring me on the team. So it saved me almost immediately.
I think that's so great. I think there's a tendency when you are starting out as an entry level dev to just keep going through the tutorials, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, but there's so many different people that are doing those same projects. So if you're able to do something where you're building something that you're interested in or something that solves a problem for you, you're a little bit invested in it, but it also shows that, hey, look, I tackled this problem and I kept adding to it and growing with it. And I think that really shows, a really good representation of who you are as a coder.
Yeah, you mentioned like when you were describing talking to the company who hired you after that, that you went into the Protege project going in blind, and I was wondering like what you like in hindsight, like what do you think of when you say that? Like what pieces were you missing? Now that you've gone through the whole process and it's been a product, for however long. I just looked at my watch to see what month it was. I don't know what I'm doing, but it's been live for how many months? Six,
Coming up on
7
a
months?
year. I think
A
March will
year?
be a
Okay,
year.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, my question is like, what do you know now that like would change your approach, if anything, if you were starting Protege.dev right now?
How much time do you have? No, it was so the initial build was just a regular Create React app. Um, that was intentional because I wanted to force myself to learn some of the lower level plumbing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I wish I would have known more about state management in React. Like I kind of so right before this episode, we were talking about how some of the parts of it are really just a juggling act until it either
Mm-hmm.
dies or does what it's supposed to do. Um, so I think if I would have known a little bit more around that, that could have been. I don't think it's an unstable system, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not as good as it can be. And I'm actually in the process of rewriting some of that work now, and I expect I'm going to be able to eliminate probably about 40% of what's there now and have something that works better in, with better practices in place at the same time. I also didn't really know much about like component systems. Like I knew what components were, but I didn't really have a good idea of how to utilize them correctly, which is another thing I've been kind of cleaning up as I've been doing this rebuild. We're converting from Create React App to Next right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, even just last night, I was looking at some stuff like, why didn't I just make this a component rather than pasting it 7 times in the same place?
Yeah.
So just little stuff like that.
It's interesting. I used to write screenplays with my brother, and one of the first bits of advice someone told me or I heard, it was write your whole screenplay and then cut 50% and then rewrite it. And like as you're talking through this, that kind of makes sense to me in terms of like, okay, you have something down and you learned a lot in that first process, but what you learned should enable you to really tighten things up and getting it working efficiently or making it an effective story. And code's not that different from that.
Yeah, that was what Andy's the co-founder. He came on really early on with me. One thing we were very adamant about when we were starting up was that we're going to try to build as much of this as possible without a library if we can. So that's why a lot of the state management with some of the forms are a bit of a juggling act, because we knew there was Redux and other things like that out there, but we wanted to kind of put ourselves in the uncomfortable position of having to build it with whatever we had available to us then, without grabbing something off the shelf. And I mean, he would probably agree. We learned a lot of wrong ways to handle state and React. We learned a lot of ways that you can do it, but probably aren't ideal. And now we're getting into the phase of now we can do it the right way with an understanding of why it's the right way.
Yeah, I mean, A of all that agreement at the beginning between you and your partner is like a very, very cool thing to do. Especially, it's nice to have alignment on that sort of thing, But I always say the best way to learn anything on any sort of deep level is to do it, just like you guys have done. And state management in particular, like a lot of things are like this, but state management is one of those where there's a million ways to do it. None of them are right or wrong, really. But you're never going to have actual full insight into why to make one choice or the other, why to use Redux versus, anything else. By reading tutorials, you're never going to figure it out, right? Like you never, like somebody could say, use Redux for this X, Y, and Z. Don't use Redux here. And you could sort of try to follow them, but you don't understand why until you've gone down the road of hacking it together and then getting to the spot where you're like, okay, I see now, like this is not working out, or this is like more of a pain than it should be, or or whatever, or I don't trust it as much, which is one of the things that's hard to explain until you feel it, right? So you have you were talking about that form state, and just not like it can be better, like it's working and stuff, but like there's some area where it's not exactly sure what's going on, or you can't track all of the different pieces of state or all of the different behaviors that go on. I think that's really great.
Yeah, and even while I'm coming through it now, I'm realizing, kind of like reflecting back on where I was last year, and like I can kind of like see the growth that I've had over the last year. So like as I'm rebuilding parts of this, I'm looking at some of the state. I'm like, okay, this definitely needs to be handled somewhere else in a more safer way, but this is actually perfectly fine to just be in this one component, and that's all it needs. And it's I don't know, me a year ago would be like so jealous of me right now that I'm like that I'm in the position to like to know the difference of when and why.
Yeah,
I think that's a really good point too, because there's always this tricky thing where you feel like, oh, I haven't grown enough. But look, you're talking about this 1 year journey and how much you've learned. You've grown a lot through that, and sometimes it feels very slow, but really you're moving a ton.
Yeah, and this is my first year as a full-time developer. So before this, I was either um I was working part-time, which was, like maybe 15 hours after I got done with the full-time job. So like, I was already probably coming in at like 60% middle capacity.
Yeah.
And then the job I had in the agency before that, it was a developer role, but it was with a bunch of proprietary stuff and some older languages. So like a lot of it didn't really. So I mean, a lot of it was just customer support to begin with, and the smaller majority after that was, it was in such a sandboxed and specific place that a lot of it couldn't really translate over.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to double back on. You said the alignment between me and Andy. A lot of that was able to happen was because, I mean, I was very junior when I just decided to go full tilt on this, but Andy was the same way. Andy was working full time as a project manager. He had written some code before. I don't know the full extent of his experience before that, but when he approached me, he was like, "Hey, I've had a similar idea. I'm kind of in the same spot." So when we were kind of like spitballing ideas, we were like, let's keep it simple. Check. Let's build as much as we can without libraries. Check. So I think part of the reason we were able to align on so many things in the beginning is that we were, for the most part, in pretty much the exact same spot career wise.
Nice.
Shout out to Andy, by the way. He just started full time as a developer, I think within the last few weeks.
Oh, nice.
So congrats on that.
Yeah, for sure.
Congrats to Andy.
Andy is also very awesome. Okay, so simultaneously, you are establishing a career as an early career developer, and you are tackling a big problem in the industry, right? So can we talk a little bit about the challenges of balancing both of those things?
I don't know if there's a balance as much as I just put as much weight on both all the time. Which is why I'm probably on like a beeline to burnout at some point. But I don't know. I don't know. I haven't really thought about it. There's not much of a balance, or I guess I don't really have a process for balancing it. So like, I'm really bad about saying yes when people ask me for stuff. So like, I joined up with Layerframe, and then thanks to a tweet that you sent out, Becca, I was propositioned for some other contract work that ended up happening like right alongside that. That turned into the full-time role that I have now. So I'm like, okay, cool. I won't have two jobs anymore. Like a month after that, someone else was like, hey, I got some contract work. Do you want to jump in on? I'm like, absolutely. Let's do it. So I don't know. I have a bad habit of keeping two jobs.
Yeah, it's so hard to balance. I'm certainly not good at that either. And that's one of the things that I'm working at figuring out. I like go through these cycles. I'm like all in for 6 weeks. And then for an entire week, I feel like I can't move. And that's obviously not healthy. I'm trying to find better ways of doing that. But also there's just this weird, I don't know, tech just moves so fast all the time. And you want to level up as a new developer. And at the same time, you're so aware of the problems of, I don't know, like being an entry level developer position that you want to tackle them when you have that passion. So there is this weird, how do I do all of these things and still take care of myself?
That's one thing I've planned to focus on this year is getting the stuff done that I want to in a healthy way. I will say one silver lining to taking on all that extra contract work is I've walked away with probably at least 2 to 3 things that I didn't know before I started the project. Well, you forgot where that sentence was going. It was going to be a good one too.
Happens to me all the time.
Yes.
No, so it allowed me to work with a couple of different, or just developers with different styles. So when I was with Layerframe, I was working with Rob, and I feel like Rob was just like a mastermind with everything. So like anytime I had a problem, he had a solution for it, and he was really good at walking me through how he got to the solution. So I walked away with some really good troubleshooting skills from that. Um, and then when I on this last contract role that I just at the end of last year, I was working with a guy named Nick, and he's just super knowledgeable around React, and like there's like so many tools and methods in React that I didn't even know were a thing until I was able to work with him. So I overload myself a lot, but so far I've walked away in the green from it.
I want to come back to this idea talking about Rob and just like learning in general. So do you have a measure or a point where you think, okay, I have been trying to figure out this problem and I know that this other person knows the answer. So at what point do you ask? Like, how far down the rabbit hole do you go before you ask for help?
So at my full-time job, we have a 1 hour rule. If you get stuck for more than an hour, then reach out to someone. And I think that's kind of been rubbing off on me for my side projects. I'm in a couple of different communities that I kind of know which one will probably more than likely have the answers I need, or will be, depending on the time of day, may just be more available. So I usually try to hit it if, right at the 1 hour mark, depending on how hard I'm spinning my wheels. Sometimes I know there's been a few times like I hit a wall and I'm like, I don't even know how to start scaling this thing, so I'm just going to immediately reach out. But then there's sometimes like, I go through my troubleshooting process, and if I still can't really get anywhere, I have a couple of different places I can reach out to. What I love about the communities that I'm in is that in most cases, it's rare that they're just gonna give me the answer, but they're more so going to work through it with me and almost kind of rubber duck me to the answer. So that's always super awesome.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, that 1 hour mark seems like a good like rule of thumb, for that sort of thing. That question comes up a lot, and with newer early career developers, I mean, that exact question comes up a lot. A lot of people are wondering it, and it's hard to sort of baseline it. I feel like the answer can sometimes change depending on the company. If you're working, like, this is not for side projects, but at a job. And I've been finding it it seems like a good thing to have an actual rule for, like you said, that that's where you learned it from. Have it written down, and make sure it's okay for early career developers to ask questions, and like let them know when to do it, right? Because you don't want. I mean, nobody wants to ask a question right away every time they don't know anything, but it always is going to be like doing the rubber ducking thing is just like such a useful tool for any developer of any skill or, learning level. It just, that 1 hour mark seems cool. I don't know.
Yeah. Speaking of rubber ducks, we did 2 years ago, we did Secret Santa for the family. My sister got me. She didn't know what to get me. So she just Googled like coder gift ideas, and she got me this.
It's got a nice
It says, "Hi, I'm Stu, your debugging friend. Tell me your steps and we'll find the bug together." It sits right here on my desk, and he does exactly that.
That's amazing.
I have the problem of, I think early in my career, it was, I don't know if I should ask a question. And now that I'm a little bit in, it's the stubbornness in me that I have to tackle. Like, I can do this, like, I don't have to ask a question. There's a real check of, I don't know, what is that, like hubris or something?
Yeah. No, I have the first kind of developer role I was in, the senior dev I worked with, he was very much trained the old school way and brought up with the old school mentality.
Yeah.
So anytime I would come to questions with him, he would assume that like I got to the question or I got to the problem and immediately asked the question.
Mm.
And that's kind of how he would react to me. Like there was a lot of tension there. Like it got to the point to where I didn't want to ask him a question because I knew I knew the vibe and what the response was going to be. What was actually happening is like I was spinning my wheels for like 2 hours trying to not have to ask him a question. And then when I did ask the question, it was like, grief, conflict, just a whole bunch of tension. So I don't know, it's been like a breath of fresh air slash a huge relief that I've found the communities that I've found and have places that I can ask questions, but B, am now with a company that like that has their own rule for when you should ask questions, and a lot of times they're gonna chop that hour down to like 30 minutes. Or like anytime I'm on a project, they're like, hey, 1 hour rule is actually 10 minutes here. 1 hour rule is
Mm.
actually 20 minutes here, and they actually want you to ask questions. We have an entire thread in Basecamp where it's just different developers asking different questions, and it's just super awesome
Wow.
thing to be a part of.
That's cool. That's really cool to hear. Like the per project or something, they'll just say, okay, for this project, we know it's like new or something, or a lot of moving pieces, so change the rule,
Yeah,
based
and
on the
they're
situation.
really aware of like um, skill level and expertise with the with different tools and stuff. So if they're bringing me onto a project that uses um, like a legacy build that they know I haven't really seen a whole lot, then that's when they'll say, hey, your window's 15 minutes for this. Or if they're moving in some cases, even some of the more experienced devs onto something where it's a little more intricate UI work where they're mostly data backend stuff, they're like, hey, okay, well now your window's 10 minutes but mine will still be the full hour. So they're really aware of like where everyone's at and like adjusting their windows accordingly.
Yeah,
It's
that's
really cool to
great.
hear. I feel like asking questions is almost a skill to learn as well. Sort of similar to Googling is a skill as a developer. It sounds everybody who has been a developer for long enough knows what that means. Like knows what a person means when they say that. That
Yeah.
Googling is a skill, and you have to learn how to Google.
Mm.
Do you feel like you have become better at asking questions? Once, like especially once you started working with maybe a company that valued that interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would even say I got better at asking questions even while I was in that environment. Because uh, well, first I want to say like me and that developer, we it was a really strange relationship. Like every Friday we would go grab lunch together, and we were best buds, and we liked the same music. We were both guitarists, and we would sit there. We shared an office. It feels weird to say that I shared a room with anyone
Yeah.
right now. But the entire day we would just sit there and talk back and forth. Like it was, we really were just friends inside the company. But when it came to that was like that was the only point of friction in that relationship, which was really strange to me. But I think it's the only thing I can chalk it up to is that's just how he was. That was the company culture he was trained in and brought up in himself. So that's the only way he knows to
Mm-hmm.
try to help others learn. Um, but yeah, I think I, even in that environment, I think I got better at asking questions because I would ask something and his response would be like, "Well, what does X mean? What does Y mean?"
Mm-hmm.
I would use the wrong words all the time, which is very
What can you give it? Can you give an example of that?
so like I would say something like, this I'm passing this argument, but it's not coming out the right way when what I meant was the method,
Mm-hmm.
but I was using the word argument, and
Sure.
his response would be like, "Well, obviously that's not going to work. You don't need an argument there." I'm like that's not. I'd be pointing at it on the screen like that right there. That's what I'm trying to do. And he's like, "Well, that's not an argument." I'm like, okay, fair enough. So like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, we also see like the issue with entry level devs and the problem of comfort level with whoever they're working with. And I have a lot of feelings about that. But one of them also is that not everybody is meant to be a mentor, right? You know, some people
Mm-hmm.
have like a natural ability. Some people can have training and get good at it. But some people, you know, they don't desire it or they feel like it takes away from their experience. And so they're aggravated by it. But
Mm-hmm.
a company not only has to make a space welcoming for new developers, but it also has to support the upper level devs who are providing the mentorship and the guidance and making sure that, you know, that culture shows that how you treat people and talk to them.
Yeah, that's the so one of Sean, the guy I mentioned earlier, he was always really good at, if I ever came to him with a question, his response was always, well, let's look at it together, or let's talk me through the steps you're trying to do, and let's see if we can find the hang up there. So I think he's one of those people that just naturally has like, well, I mean, I know he's been a guitar teacher for a while, so maybe he's just developed those teaching skills.
Yeah. I Going back to having a company support the senior devs in those roles, I feel like that's an important thing. And I guess tying it back to the framing of making it a rule, like having the rule of the 1 hour thing, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
right? That gives the younger developer, the early career, newer developer, a guideline to follow,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it also implies that the question should be asked, and that the question also should be, answered or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that has to become, I mean, you can just hope that the senior developer in whatever position is good at it and everything, but having it be part of the company culture, having it be expected, that's part of a developer's role, is supporting a junior developer or however it works out. But that part of a developer's job is doing that, not that answering a question or helping a developer through a problem is taking time away from doing your job, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that can be something that can come up, right? Where if it's not framed correctly, maybe when you were asking a question, he was just feeling like he had stuff to do and this was getting in the way of doing his stuff or something,
Yeah.
and which is not actually correct, right? Like, it's part of his job. I mean, I don't know what the exact situation was there, but like it should be
There was definitely a lot of moving projects with only one experienced and one learning developer.
right. And not having it explicit
Mm,
is a recipe for that sort of thing to happen.
yeah.
You could maybe be lucky. That's what I mean. Like, depending on just hoping that it works out, it doesn't seem like the right call. And hiring junior developers is important, but they need, like, the people hiring them need to be, prepared, right? Need to be prepared to support them, but also prepared to, have a plan for the senior developers too, because it's hard. It's also another whole skill to learn. And having some guidelines like that, I feel like is such a good thing to, and sort of almost easy thing to pull off, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like an easy win to really improve the situation is just like, this is how it works. Ask a question, like ask a question after an hour, answer the question after, that when the junior developer helps, like it, or asks, and I just like that. I like the clarity of that,
Yeah.
I think it's
And
really cool.
that actually reminds me, one thing before I knew about the 1 hour rule, one thing Sean always did to me that I didn't know until like, months and months later, is that when I would ask him a question, he would set like a timer, like he'll reply within 1 hour if he doesn't hear back from me. And I didn't know that was a thing. So like I'd just ask him a question and I'd keep trying to work on it. And then there were a lot of times where like, oh, never mind, got it. And then like at what I think it was after I'd left the contract role with him, he's like, yeah, I used to give you like an hour anytime you asked a question, and towards the end you got to where you were responding back within like 10 minutes. That never mind, you found the answer. But touching back on what you were saying about companies needing to like proactively support junior developers, that's one of the things we're doing on Protege. So all of the listings there are curated and like approved by us. And that's one thing when a company lists with us. One thing we do um, is, first we read through the listing and make sure it kind of lines up with the goals we have for Protege. But then we also kind of like dig into the company's website and maybe their LinkedIn to try and get an idea of the company culture. Like, are
Yeah.
they are they posting this role because they just want to pay someone cheap, or are they posting this role because they genuinely want to find someone and build them up into the best version that they can be? And we try to we try to make sure we have a good idea of of the answer to that
Yeah.
for every listing.
Well, that's really cool. I mean, and that's like, I feel like one of the things that makes Protege, special is the curation and the sort of insight into the junior developer mind, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's like you said, it's not just a, I don't know, collection of things that people want to find cheap work or something like that, right?
Yeah, I'm
It's really cool.
I will always refer to myself as a perpetually junior developer. So hopefully I will always be able to keep that mindset. But we have a I was actually just talking to some people in the virtual coffee group not too long ago about some tools and features we can add to hopefully help empower both sides of the process in our
Yeah.
phase 2 build.
So, okay. So, if you had a magic wand and you could get everything you want for Protege, what does it look like?
If I get everything I want in terms
Mm-hmm.
of features or success.
Whatever you want. Let's do it all. You've got a magic wand. It's your choice.
I had a magic wand. Well, there'd be accounts for both candidates and companies. There'd be tools on both ends to to both empower and protect both sides. I don't really feel like the companies would really need much protection, but in some cases, like maybe the candidates do, especially from like um, ageism or something like that. Yeah, so some tools around like empowering candidates against discrimination. So like maybe only like their work history and like some kind of like generic questions they answer are available, and the company can't really see what their name, gender, age, or location or anything like that is until they schedule an interview with them and have something kind of like on the books or something like that.
Yeah.
Or even a tool to where maybe candidates can say like, I'm in this time zone, but I'm willing to work in up to these, or some different stuff like that. I haven't looked at like the company side of a lot of the uh, job board competitors, which I don't even really consider them competitors because like they they have their niche, they're doing their thing. We're trying to solve a completely different problem. So we'd really just like all the tools for everyone, and that's it.
All right. Excellent. It is, I mean, it is so hard to search for a job as an entry level or junior developer
Mm-hmm.
because they don't make it clear, or you do have those problems where they're like, yes, we want an entry level developer, but you have to know all of these things just because they want to get you to do work for less money. And that's such a problem. And we see people over and over going into those environments and just being totally frustrated, and it's affecting their health because it's such a terrible place to work. But then it's so hard to find another job that it's just, I don't know, it's just this huge problem.
Yeah, ideally we want to build a network of companies that we know without a shadow of a doubt, like just support juniors like from the ground up in every direction. And
Yeah.
that's really what we want for it is just oh, you're a new candidate and you're looking for a job. Okay, well we know these 15 guys, or these 15 companies are hiring, and we have a good working relationship with all of them, and we know regardless of where you end up, any of them are going to take care of you.
Yeah, that's so awesome. And it's nice too to have connections with communities where you can see junior developers who need jobs and you know that you can vouch for them too, right?
Mm.
Like there's a difference. I'll get those Twitter messages like, "Hey, I saw you asked about your friend wanting a .NET job. I want one too. Can you recommend me next?" Like, "No. I don't know you."
I actually just had I guess it was kind of like a screening call last week, with a company that they just like they hit me up on Twitter like out of nowhere. And I spent like the last 10 minutes of that interview like talking someone up from Virtual Coffee because I'd referred them to apply to the application. So like
Nice.
um the lady I was interviewing with, she was like, okay, she was about to do like her little goodbye speech, and I was like, wait, before you go, let me tell you about this person. And I was like, they do this, they have this experience. Look at their application. Forget about mine.
Nice.
Okay, so another thing I want to talk about because you are just doing like stacks on stacks of things. Okay, so you're building a career, you're building a community slash movement, and it's also an open source project, and you're streaming some of this. So you're like, okay, let me make this even more difficult. So I'm going to add the open source maintainer thing, and I'm going to stream it. So what was the idea behind adding those components? And I both am interested in like how has that been challenging, but also like how has that helped you as well?
Well, we decided to make it open source because we wanted a way. Well, one of the questions we kept asking ourselves early on was like, what can we do to let the companies know that the candidates they're considering here
Mm.
are, worth the hire. And one of the ways we thought we could do that was um, make it an open source project to where those candidates can actually contribute to the platform
Mm.
itself. We display anyone's who's contributed to the project is on our contributors page. Um, and the idea behind that was that companies could ideally in our heads is how it played out. Companies come here, they want to post a job, and then they see it on the contributors page that so there's actually 6 applicants here that have actively helped build the platform I'm listing this job on. Maybe that'll help give them some preference or something. And even if it doesn't, then we're doing our best to help junior developers. So even if it doesn't help in that regard, it gives them the opportunity to work on a real world app that they can add to their resume. I mean, even if it's just, I think there's been some contributions that were just accessibility fixes, but that may have just been, from code perspective, all they did was change a Tailwind class, but they also set up the project locally. Um, they also, at least have an understanding of Git and how that whole process works. Um, so that was a lot of the reasons why we decided to do that. I decided to stream it because um, partly because I was unemployed and bored, partly because I wanted to force myself into some accountability. So like now there's a lot of people out there that know this is a thing. So um, I don't want to say they're depending on me, but they know it's a thing. And if I'd feel really bad if I started building this thing that was going to help a community and then just like let it go. So now I have all these people that know it's a thing and they can just say, "Hey, how's that going?" And my response can never be, "Oh, I turned it off." So that's never going to be a thing.
I like that idea of the streaming for accountability. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, the side project issue, of abandoning it or not or whatever. And you're right. You already have an audience. You have people coming in, but that the streaming, I feel like is a interesting bit to add just for like the accountability part of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and there's actually parts of the application now that wouldn't exist if it wouldn't have been for streaming because I'd hit a bug or get hung up on something that I probably would have never found. But um there've been people in the chat that were helping me debug some stuff. And if you look on the contributors page, The last 3 entries on it, it actually just says special commit. Those are there because those are 3 people that were consistently there for, I think, the first 2 months I was working on building it. I streamed pretty much every day. So those 3 people were there for probably 85% of that streaming process, and were doing a lot of coaching or problem solving with me through the chat. So that's why we put them up there. Yeah, and we haven't really done much marketing for Protege. I feel weird trying to market a thing I built, but it's kind of through Twitter and through streaming and through a couple other communities. We've somehow managed to we average around 400 users per month, which in the larger scale of Google Analytics probably isn't a whole lot, but for something I started building out of nowhere last year with no marketing, I think that's pretty good numbers. So we're really, we have a phase 2 we're kind of ramping up for now, which is part of the next migration is part of that. So we want to get those numbers up, not because we want, good analytic points or whatever the business side of that is, but if we can get that number up, then that's more people that's just more people we're helping, or maybe at least giving hope that someone's out there doing something on the behalf of them.
Absolutely. And the bigger community gets around that, or audience or whatever, the more it's sort of exponentially increases the exposure without even doing ads or anything specific to grow it. That's really cool.
All right, Drew, thanks for being here with us. We really enjoyed having you, and congratulations on everything that you've done with Protege and for your 1-year anniversary or birthday or whatever you want to call it coming up. So where can our listeners find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Drew Clem Create, Drew Clem CR8, because all the good handles are taken. You can find me. I haven't been streaming a whole lot lately because of work and 2 kids, but I'm on Twitch at twitch.tv/Ducky_87. I used to do some gaming streaming 4 years ago, and I just never changed the handle, and now I just kind of like it. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, and you can also find me in the virtual coffee sessions. Nice. If you ever want to pop in and join one of those, usually on Tuesdays. I usually can't make Thursdays.
Yeah, and also there's some open issues on Protege, so if you're interested in contributing, it's a great project. It's got a great community behind it, and there's lots of people there to willing to help and answer questions. So we are very glad that you came here on this podcast and that you've been working on this project. So thanks, Drew.
Thank you.
Thanks, Drew.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Virtual Coffee Podcast. This episode was produced by Dan Ott and Becca Harrott-Weigel and edited by Dan Ott. If you have questions or comments, you can hit us up on Twitter at virtualcoffee.io, or you can email us at podcast@virtualcoffee.io. You can find the show notes, plus you can sign up for our newsletter to find out what Virtual Coffee's been up to on our website at virtualcoffee.io.
Please subscribe to our podcast and be sure to leave us a review. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.